My name is Dan Gorley. I was born in May 21st, 1951 in Muncie, Indiana. My parents lived there. Sometime between when I was born and 2 years old, we moved to Wisconsin, endured one winter in high snow drifts, and my parents decided that wasn't for them. Their name was Ellen and Wendell Gorley. And we moved to Bonita Springs, Florida, and bought a hotel motel trailer park called Imperial River Court, which is where I grew up. We owned that for 25 years. And that's how I got involved in the Bonita Springs Fire Department, because I used to work for Benson's Grocery. Cecil Harvard was the volunteer fire chief. And after I started working there when I was young, he recruited me when I turned 16 because they were always looking for volunteers. So when I was 16 years old, I signed up as a volunteer. When you first volunteered, like I said, you swept stations, you washed trucks, you cleaned hose. You couldn't actually go on the fire. You could go to the fire scene. My parents would have to drive me because back then you weren't old enough to drive, you know, so they'd drive you to the scene, and the volunteers would sit there and fill Indian packs. They were a pack you put on your back, and you had a little pump, and you pumped it, and you went around after the big fire was put out. You put out little stumps and small places and squirted that. And, you know, so then you learned about how the trucks operated. You couldn't drive them, but you learned how to put them in pump. You learned how to hook hoses to each other. You learned how to hook the nozzles up, what the tools were called, what appliances you had on the trucks, you know, to move water around, where your water sources were, how long it took to fill trucks, you know, basic understanding of changing spark plugs, air filters, because we're greasing the trucks up to make them work and stuff like that. You learned all that stuff as a junior firefighter. And then when you got 18 years old and you could actually go on the trucks, then they taught you how to start driving the trucks on the road and off the road. You know, you could, after a while, it took about a year of training and stuff, and then you were allowed to actually go take that truck to a scene and pump the water, you know, fight the fires, run the lights and sirens and all that stuff.
Hi, I'm Don Colapietro. Was born and raised in Connecticut. Joined the Navy out of high school. When I got out of the Navy in '66, my folks lived right down the street from a volunteer firehouse, station number 2, and they actually recruited me because they were looking for some young guys, and I joined up then, went from firefighter to lieutenant, and then we moved to, I met my wife, Jane, in 1971, excuse me, and we dated for quite a while, and then we came to Florida, to Bonita Springs, to visit her folks. One nasty February, they had a place called Cussin Manufacturing, and they did trailer repairs and trailer storage. And it started from there, and because I was a volunteer in Newington, when we talked about moving down here, I asked her father, Pete, if it was okay with him to join the fire department in Bonita. He said, yeah, go ahead, do whatever you like. So we got here on a Sunday. I met Cecil Harvard at the grocery store on Monday, and my instructions were to go to the firehouse Tuesday night and meet Dan. So I showed up there on Tuesday night, met Dan. We hit it off right off the bat. I left, went to go home. The first thing I did was he gave me a set of gear. I had a radio and boots, coat, and helmet. And I said, well, how about a key for the firehouse? He says, you don't need one. We don't lock the firehouse. And I thought, well, that sounds like trouble to me, but okay. So anyway, I went home, and my wife said, well, how did you do? I said, well, got my gear in the trunk, and here's my radio. So I guess I'm good.
I used to work at Benson's Grocery, stocking the shelves, and when the call would go down, Cecil would holler, let's go, and we'd jump in the chief's vehicle, and it was like less than a mile, and sometimes one day we slid into the station before he got the Ford Bronco. He had an old International Harvester truck, and the brakes didn't work too good. We went to pull off the old 41 into Station 1 and hit a mud puddle, and we crashed into the corner of the building, you know, trying to stop. And then you'd jump on those trucks. You'd hang on the tailboards back then. They didn't have cabs where everybody sit inside, so there was a bar across the back or wherever. You just jump on that truck and hang on for dear life. And it was probably lucky that nobody got killed. I remember one time going to a fire up at Coconut, and Donald Smith was driving, and we went around the old and new 41 north of town a little too fast, and the truck started sliding sideways, and I'm holding on for dear life, and you didn't have no seat belts or anything back then. I said, whoa, Donald, whoa, slow this thing down. We got to get there. And so nobody ever rolled a truck under my watch. I mean, there were some trucks that got in an accident. Nobody was seriously injured under my watch or killed. And I was very thankful for that, but we had a big emphasis on safety and training, and it paid off all those years. But back in the early days, you really didn't preach safety. You didn't, I mean, we went into fires, we didn't even have air packs in the early days. You wore blue jeans, you had rubber boots, you had a black coat that come down below your waist, and you had household gloves. And there was no air packs. You went in and you breathed whatever smoke or chemicals was in there. I mean, you never even thought about hazardous materials or getting electrocuted or anything like that.
My name is Alexander Peter Grantt, and I first joined the Bonita Springs Fire and Rescue Control District Fire Department in January of 1987. And I was their first hazardous materials person on the fire department. I was a volunteer. I got paid $5 per call, as all volunteers did. At that time, I believe there were only originally 9 paid firefighters, and there was a chief, a deputy chief, and a fire marshal. And that was the fire department when I was first on the department. The rest were volunteers.
To be a volunteer then, basically we were just looking for warm bodies. You know, if you were able and you were in reasonably good shape, I mean, you had a spot. You know, we never had too many guys. There were times when guys would join and then for whatever reason lose interest, you know, and we'd have to go around and pick up the gear, you know, and then I don't know that we ever had a waiting list, because if somebody showed up and wanted to be a volunteer, we took them on. You know, it was just that, it was that easy and that good. You know, we learned as we went. You know, we went to different classes. The airport would have some rescue stuff, and basically we learned a lot on our own. You know, we just got in here and we had a meeting. We met every week or every month, and then we would share, you know, whatever we had learned or somebody had read about. We just try to incorporate all that stuff.
We had the tools you needed to fight fires. You had your spanner wrenches, your hydrant wrenches. I mean, you had the basic firefighting tools. They didn't have the elaborate stuff that they got today. You didn't have heat sensing equipment to find out, you know, where there might be a hot spot after you put the fire out. But you had your spanner wrenches, you had your hydrant wrenches, you had the tools to rubber mallets to put the big fittings together or take them apart. Or, you know, Kim Shaw, he would make tools, different things. If we needed something special, he could make it. The guys back then would make stuff. But we had exhaust fans, you know, we had the extension cords, and back then you just didn't do what they do today. I mean, it's a whole different ball game with safety and high-tech equipment, heat sensors and all that. I mean, one of the ways you would sense back then that you didn't have the fire out after there was no flames was you'd turn all the lights off and you'd take a flashlight and you'd shine it. And if you saw little trickles of smoke coming up, well, you knew there was something still smoldering or burning there. You know, or you'd go around with take your gloves off and you'd run around areas you feel heat, say, hey, I got to dig into this area more to put this fire out. It's still hot there.
And at that point, I think we had a softball team, and I went to the softball game. I don't think I was playing yet, but we got a call, and it was a trailer fire. So everybody just dropped everything at the game and jumped over the fence and hauled freight to the station. And I took my car and went to the call. It was this lady had been smoking in bed and set herself on fire, and got her out of there. And everybody's looking around. They want to get back to the softball game. So Dan said, "You could drive that truck, can't you?" I went, "Sure." Well, that was my introduction. So I took the truck back to the station, and we went from there.
Well, what happened, there was a need for volunteers to augment the paid firefighters. And don't forget, back then, there was a lot of brush fires here, etc. And they would need a backup personnel at fires and traffic accidents. And that was when since I was only a member of the Chamber of Commerce and I was not a member of the JCs or anything like that, I thought I could help my community by my knowledge in chemistry. So that's how I joined the fire department. I was advising whatever the situation was. In other words, if it was a chemical spill or if there was a gas spill, etc. And not only that, but at a fire scene, for instance, if like we had brush fires or something like that, I would be assigned to help load up, take, for instance, we had brush trucks and we had pumpers, and if the pumper needed water at a fire hydrant, I would fill up a paid firefighter by filling up the fire engine or the brush truck with water so they could go back to fight the fire, brush fire, etc.
And as I got older, he was elected. The chief was appointed by the governing board. Everybody under the chief was elected by the membership. So I worked my way up, and I was appointed as a lieutenant, and I served for a lieutenant for a while. And then I got elected as captain, and I moved into the captain's position, overseeing, a station versus a truck as lieutenant. Then I got elected as assistant chief, and so then I was in charge when the chief was gone. And that was Cecil Harvard. He was a volunteer chief. He got paid $200 a month, a stippling, and he was furnished a vehicle.
I made the most calls because our shop was literally right down the street. It was on just north of Rosemary. So I made almost every call. Went from firefighter, and like Dan said, you were elected to the other positions. I went from firefighter to lieutenant to captain to assistant chief in what I thought was a really short amount of time. Then it started to get really busy, and Dan needed a full-time assistant chief, and he offered me the job, and I thought, I didn't think long enough. I should have taken it, but I didn't. But so he didn't know what to do with me at that point, so he created the deputy chief's position, and I held that all the way up until, I think, 89. We moved the shop in 88 up further north, and I think that was the beginning of the end. It was just too far a run to go. I guess Dan got a few complaints about my old black hot rod roaring down the streets to come to fires, but it all worked out in the end.
At some point in time, my parents owned, like I said, the Imperial River Court across the street. We had cabins along the river, a main two-story building, a lot of trailers. And Cecil was related to Comer Benson, which owns Benson's Grocery across the street. Well, one day, Cecil went to deliver groceries in the chief's vehicle, lost control of it coming out of the side street, went through off the road through the fence, hit one of my parents' cabins, knocked it 8-10 feet off the foundation. Luckily he wasn't hurt, just some minor bumps and bruises, but at that point the insurance company wrote a letter to the board that they would not insure the district if he was to drive any vehicles. So then that left the board, 5-member board, a dilemma what to do. And after this was in the summer, and then somewhere around November, they approached me as assistant volunteer chief and offered me the job full-time starting December 1st, 1976, full-time chief at $12,000 a year. And prior to that, I worked for Haynes Refrigeration and Appliances, and Harvey Haynes, he was one of the board members. And prior to that, I worked for Hogue Electric in between my senior year in high school, Hogue Electric. And then when I graduated from high school in 1969, I worked for Haynes Refrigeration doing installations of air conditioning, refrigeration, repair. And so when the fire bell would run off before I got the full-time job, Haynes Refrigeration was on Bonita Beach Road near Mango, and the field across the street was number 2 fire station. When the tones would go off, we would dart, if we were in the business, over to the fire station, jump in a truck and go to the calls. The communications, you had no really communications once you left the truck if you were in the woods on foot or something, dragging hose or something. Nowadays, everybody's got radios on their shoulders and everybody carries radios with them. But you had electronic notifications, but before you had electronic notifications, when there was 3 phones, there was numerous phones in town. It would ring 3 times. On the 3rd ring, you'd pick it up, and whoever was on the other end say, hey, my house is on fire, got a cut, I'm in a car wreck, or whatever it was. And everybody'd listen, and sometimes there'd be 8 or 10 people listening on the phone. Sometimes there'd be 1 or 2. That person would respond to the station. When you got there, you turned the big air raid siren on, and that notified all the volunteers within hearing distance that, hey, there's an emergency, report to the station. When they did, there was a big bulletin board there, and you wrote the address on it where you was going. And it was kind of, crude communications back there, and there was no cell phones or any of that stuff, no electronic devices. When they first came out with 800 megahertz radio systems, which everybody uses now, the biggest downfall to that was from a VHF standpoint, radio system to an 800 megahertz, was the frequency was so low, and trees and buildings and stuff interfered with your communications. And we lobbied the county for several years. I sat on the Lee County Fire Chiefs Association Communications Committee, and we got another tower. Our closest tower was up in Estera. We got a tower in Bonita behind the dog track. Tremendous increase in reliability for the fire department, the ambulance service, sheriff's office, that all used it. And so Bonita Springs Utilities also used it. So it cost us money to pay for all those systems and service. The county maintained the core tower sites that made it work, but each district or entity, whether it was sheriff, whoever was on it, had to pay for all their own equipment and stuff. And we had all kind of issues before that tower got built down here. But we still had to maintain two services in all of our trucks and communications in the 90s and 2000s before I retired, because Collier County and Division of Forestry and a lot of other agencies in the state of Florida, they couldn't afford the 800 megahertz system, so we had to run 2 systems in all of our trucks. We still had to keep the 800, and we had to go back and maintain the VHF system, or we couldn't communicate with them when we went on mutual aids for hurricanes or major wildfires around the state. We had mutual aid agreements where, if we were summoned, we could go anywhere in the state of Florida and help would come to us anywhere in the state of Florida. And so after I became full-time fire chief and was moving on, and we had about 30 volunteers. I think I started out with a $70,000, $80,000 budget in 1976, and the department just was manned by all volunteers. And we had revenue to fix the trucks, but everybody else was volunteer.
In between those times, nobody wanted the job of fire commissioner. So Charlene Henney, who was the department secretary, asked me if I'd do it. And I went, well, yeah, what do I have to do? She said, nothing, I'll take care of it. Well, nobody else wanted the job, so I was automatically a fire commissioner. and I served on the fire commission from 81 to, I think, 98. At the end, I was the chairman. Oversaw the growth of the department, which was phenomenal. Dan always was on the forefront of anything that was new that we needed. He talked about the Hearst tool, which I had qualified on up in Connecticut. And we had what we had at the time. Instead of a Hearst tool, we had an old 10-ton porta-power that was this hydraulic ram contraption that you pieced together, and that was it worked, but it was by far it was not the way to go. And we got our first rescue tool. And I was on the board at that point, and I lobbied for that tool. One of the commissioners didn't think we needed to have two of those, thought it was a lot of money, and so I just asked him if he was on the causeway and got into a wreck and was pinned, did he want to wait while we brought the tool from Station 1 on Old 41? So that argument kind of went by, and we got the tool.
The bookkeeper, she got a part-time stiffin. It was Ruth Shaw for quite a while, then Charlene Henney, and then Iris Roman came in and was the last administrative assistant that I had for her, retired. But those was the ladies that did all the books and run all the paperwork and stuff. And as the years went on and we got past 76, we started getting into the 80s and 90s. David B. Shakarian was a big guru that came in from California, multi-billionaire, I think, but they bought up all the land between the Imperial River all the way up to Halfway Creek, and they bought like 4 sections of land, and they developed that whole Bonita Bay development. And once that development took off, our revenue just started climbing, and so did our calls for service, because they had 2 golf courses in there, high rises, condominiums, apartments, and it just seemed like that was the catalyst that started the growth for this area, and it just exploded after that.
After I got my bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, I worked for 1 year as a junior chemist at Texas Gulf Sulfur in North Carolina, and then I went to school and back to school to get a master's degree with a major in soil chemistry at the North Carolina State University in Raleigh. And so I had some chemistry courses there too, and microbiology, etc. And then I went to work for the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. That was the state chemist's office, and I worked there for 9 years as an analytical chemist.
Dan was the ultimate leader at that point. He knew which way the department needed to go, and he knew how to get it done. But as he said, Station 2 was getting fewer and fewer guys to respond. So that's where the first paid men went. And of course, all the volunteers wanted the job. I think they would have cut each other's throats for that job at the time. But the cream of the crop was selected to man that station 24/7. It was the start of the paid department, and it got more and more. We just needed more and more people. You couldn't get the volunteers to come out, and we just transitioned into a full-time paid department, one of the best around. Always had top shelf equipment. It was always maintained to the hilt. Never had failures. And we did eventually lock the station, by the way. I thought that was a key thing. My fear was not that anybody would steal anything, but that somebody just might, as a prank, open that door and take the keys out of the trucks. And then we were really stuck, so.
In 1984, we hired our first full-time employees. We hired 7 of them. And they mainly worked out of Station 2, 2 per shift, for 1 day on, 2 days off. And then the 7th person, he was a swing person. So if somebody called in sick or had a vacation, you still had 2 on duty all the time. But we only had 2 stations. the main station on Old 41, and then number 2 station down on Beach Road. And like I said, they were all volunteer stations at that point.
Because I got there, I was usually the first one there. I usually got to drive the truck because that was the rule. First one in drove the truck.
We never had any diesel engine fire trucks. They were all gas engine, cab over Fords, made by Ward LaFrance. One of the first trucks I bought new was a 1976 Dodge, little 4x4 quick attack truck. And we ran that out of Station 1. We had 2 Ward LaFrances. One was a 71 and one was a 73. We had an old 1942 Chevrolet that we got from military surplus. And we had a Ford GTB. They used it for troop and ammo carrier in World War II. Kim Shaw and Walter Pond built those trucks from scratch along with volunteers. But Walter Pond was, he owned a shop over in Industrial Street off Beach Road, and Kim Shaw worked for Shannon Supply up north of town, and they built those trucks in the evenings and when they're off. And they had 500 gallons of water, a 250-gallon tank or pump on them that was gas driven. You sit down a little cubby hole. It was 4-wheel drive. Everybody in Southwest Florida knew about those trucks because they would pretty much go anywhere, and they were outstanding for fighting brush fires. They had a little deck gun on them. You could just get in and weave through the woods and work with forestry. And a lot of our fires back then was brush trucks. And so I think it was 1973, Kim Shaw built the second one of those. So we ended up with 2, one at each station.
They were slow. First gear was good for about 2 miles an hour. So you had to shift it virtually in the driveway. Had to get it into second gear. They were hard to handle. The brakes were, they were there, but boy, I tell you, you got to plan ahead. The most scared I ever was, we went out to Citrus Park and we were going over 75 and I was clipping right along and I saw the street coming up Morton and I stood on the brakes and I had both feet on that pedal trying to get that thing to slow down enough to make the corner. And somehow we did, and I learned a very valuable lesson that day. Take it easy. But as we progressed and as the equipment became newer, we had more power, we had much, much better brakes, and it just went on from there. The brush trucks were slow, but we had a fire at it was the Whale's Tail, I think at the time. It was a restaurant on the corner of Beach Road and Old 41. And we pulled up, the pumper had left, and myself, and I think it was Lanny Keeler, got on the brush truck, and we took off and headed there. Well, they were still hooking up the hydrant. We pulled into the parking lot. We had 500 gallons of water, had the pump already running, and we put the fire out before they could get a line off the pumper. And that was a monumental occasion. So it was more than a brush truck. Put out a structure fire that day.
I don't remember what year we got rid of those. I think we got rid of them around 91 or 93, because then we went to 6, I don't remember the model number, but it was like a 2.5-ton international truck with 750 gallons of tank, air conditioned cab and all that, because those old open cabs, it's got to be a safety issue where you could roll over and you weren't protected. As a matter of fact, the fire department still has them in service today. But
I got introduced to diving in the Navy. I had some friends that were in the dive locker. I never certified with the Navy, but I did get to use the equipment. We had dive equipment in Connecticut, and I went only on one call, and it was really nasty. This guy had driven off the edge of the road into the Connecticut River, and you couldn't see 3 inches in that water. But we went down there and located the car. There were 2 of us that went in, and I don't know how we found the car. I have no idea, but we did find it. We managed to attach a cable to it, and then they winched it out with a wrecker. And when it came out, the guy that was in the car, this was back in the days of vent windows, and the door was partially open, and that vent window was right through his eye and out the top of his head. That was my introduction. And I think down here, because we had the equipment, Dan, we got a call. Matter of fact, it was right in back of our shop. And this guy had been in a boat. There were 2 Spanish guys that were in a very small boat, maybe a 8 or 10 footer. And one of them fell overboard. and down he went. Well, he drowned because he didn't know enough to stand up. The water was only 5 feet deep. So we got the call, and Janie and I pulled up, and we suited up and went in, and she was still putting her gear on when I went in the water, and I just made a straight line for the boat that was still there, and sure enough, there he was, and scared to, man, I didn't know what to do. I reached out to grab him, and his eyes were open, and when I pulled on his arm, air bubbles came out of his mouth, and I almost let him go, but I had enough sense, I guess, to hang on to him and get him to shore. But that was the only one. I think we went in one other time off of Pennsylvania Avenue, and that was in the middle of the night. That was not a good dive. But fortunately, there was nobody in the car, so we were able to do that.
In the 70s and 80s, we had 2 stations. 1992, I believe, we designed and had built Station 3 up north of town, and the street where it was at was unnamed, and the fire equipment dealer that we bought all of our trucks from was called 108 Fire Equipment. So the street being unnamed, I thought it would be kind of cool to name the street, so I submitted the application to the county, and they approved it as 108 Street, and that's how that street became that, and it still this day is called 108 Street, but it's right next to our Station 3. And then we acquired land in 2001, somewhere in there, and we built Station 4. That was very good. We rebuilt Station 2. I don't remember what year that was. That was in the early 2000s also. Just the tremendous growth. We was outgrowing our facilities, and we were adding 8, 10, 12 employees every 2-3 years to keep up with tremendous growth we had. I mean, we used to run somewhere less than 100 calls a year, and we were running in thousands of calls a year with all the growth that came here. It just exploded with all the different condos that went on the beach, Pelican Landing come in, just all up and down Beach Road. Everything was just grooming. We was a booming area. We were the undiscovered area. People were getting out of southeast Florida. People were flocking down here from up north, from all over, and it was desirable. The winters were wonderful. And the way the fire department back then, they was organized as a volunteer fire department in the 1950s. The volunteers back there, and I'm sure Cecil Harvard had something to do with it, and Benson, Homer Benson, but they incorporated it as a not-for-profit Bonita Springs Fire Department sometime in 1950 to 1955. And then they realized that fundraising was something that they needed a steady revenue of income because the area was going to grow. So on May 31st, 1965, it became an independent special district. And from that date on, they was governed by 5 elected officials, elected at large on a staggering term, 3 on one term, 2 on another every 4 years. And it was a volunteer organization, and they met once a month. And the budget, as it progressed through the years, was going up and up and up. The millage, we tried to keep it around under 2 mills with the board and still provide the ample revenue to provide the health benefits, the retirement benefits, upkeep, build new stations. When I think I retired in 2007, I think the budget was around 31 million, and I had almost 7 million in reserves. And it's probably a good thing, because when the recession hit, I think 2007 or 2008, they used those reserves to get them through those lean years. But the 5-member boards, I mean, I had excellent boards. Don Colapietro was a board member. Harvey Haynes was a board member. Frank Crane was a board member. McIntosh was a board member. And Randy Davison. I mean, we just had Ernie Coleman. We just had a lot of Jim Shannon. We had a lot of great people that ran and had their hearts in the right area, that they wanted to maintain a great fire control district.
When my first night, I went to the station, Station 1 to meet Dan, and that's when I got my gear, and everybody was checking out my car because I had loaded the thing with lights up in Connecticut, and in Connecticut, our lights were blue. That was a decision that was made prior to my ever joining the fire department up there. Well, when the guy saw the blue lights, there was, you can't do that. The cops have blue lights down here. So, well, okay, I guess I'll have to change them. So I got all red lenses on there. But everybody was real friendly. We got along really well. I don't think there was any bickering type. We just got along well. Everybody pitched in, did the best they could every time. That was all you could ask for.
Somewhere in the 90s, we only had 2 ambulances stationed in Bonita Springs. The county ran those. And we saw the need for more ambulances, and we lobbied the county and lobbied them, and they wouldn't put us no more ambulances down here. So we started lobbying the Florida legislature to change our incorporation laws, our bill that was created in 1965, and in we lobbied us and about other independent special districts. There's probably about 30 of them around the state. They're water districts, hospital districts, fire districts, homeowners districts, but you had to be an independent district. And there was possibly 30 of them in the state of Florida, and we all went together and lobbied. It took us 7 years to get the bill passed so we could have paramedics on our fire engines, because the county would not put ambulances down here. We saw the need. We needed more medical care, pre-medical care before the ambulance arrived on the scene. So we lobbied for 6-7 years, and finally in '96 got the bill passed the legislature where it allowed independent districts, with the blessing of the county, to put paramedics on the fire engines. So we got that passed. We got a bunch of great employees trained. So back then we had 3 stations. Every station had at least 1 paramedic on an engine, and the benefits to the community was tremendous, because once an ambulance come to the scene, loaded somebody up and left, a lot of times they were gone an hour or 2 before they got back. Well, if we had another call in there, a trauma call or a medical call, they could stabilize that patient until another ambulance could respond down here from Lee County. So, I mean, it was a tremendous asset, and I'm sure over the years it's saved hundreds and hundreds of lives, from auto accidents to farm accidents to falls, slip and falls, heart attacks, you name it. That was a tremendous asset, and I was very proud of working so hard to get that. I was also president of the Lee County Fire Chiefs Association for several years. I was on the Bonita Study Group, which before we incorporated, studied everything here from our basic needs for water retention, for wells, to roads, to future growth management. It took 2 or 3 years to go through that Bonita Study Group, and then the county adopted it as a growth management tool for Bonita Springs when they amended their growth plans in the 90s. And our volunteers, I can't say enough for them over the years. I got pictures of them in my retirement party. Donald Smith, Don Colapietro, Don Cleveland, Ken Shivel, Walter Pond, Kim Shaw. I mean, the list goes on and on. Morris McCormick, Dean Jones. I mean, a lot of those early volunteers we had went on and become paid employees with the district. There were a lot of them. The first 7 was actually volunteers. All of them were volunteers, and they made the career jump, and they had faith in the community, and they knew the community would take care of them over the years, and their hearts was in public safety. So when I retired in 2007, I had 30 years and 6 months as full-time employee of the district. I had another 9 years as volunteer, because I started in 1967 as a volunteer. So I basically had almost 40 years of service to the community. If you got in the fire service, you didn't get into it for the money or the benefits. You got into it because you wanted to make the community better, and you wanted to help your fellow man. And that's why I got into it. I know everybody else that got into it. We put our hearts and souls in the early days. I know the older historic 1956 truck, the first brand new truck that Bonita ever bought. I don't remember what year it was. It was somewhere in the 70s, early 80s. It needed restoring. The volunteers came together, sandblasted it, refurbished the whole thing, lights, painted it, all that. We still have that truck today. It's not an active firefighting truck, but they use it in parades, 4th of July, and different events around town. They run it out, and it's still functioning, still operating to this day. So
the ladies' auxiliary formed up. My wife Jane was, I think, one of the original members. Chris Shelley was on there. Dan's wife, Debbie, was there. And they would, originally it started to bring us, we had a long brush fire to bring cold water, snacks. And like I said before, there was always 2 cartons of cigarettes with them, because a lot of guys would come out of a brush fire just hacking and wheezing, and the first thing they would do would light up a cigarette. That we were dumb and tough back then. But then with the chicken barbecues got started, they used that money. There was always a budget for the firehouse, but they bought extras. I think they bought one of the first microwaves. They bought cookware. They donated just all kinds of things. But then as it went on, and as there were more and more paid, they shied away from the ladies' auxiliary, and then it finally disbanded.
When we'd have our barbecues back, even though we had a funding source, we'd done the barbecues to raise money for the auxiliary, because they would come out, like a lot of people have said, and they would support us at a big house fire, big brush fire, whatever was going on. They'd bring us food, water, drinks. Like Don said, cigarettes. I never smoked, but they'd bring cigarettes out for some of the guys. Whatever time it was, they'd take off from their work or whatever and drop what they was doing.
I don't know where the money came from. I'm trying to remember. Well, I might have donated those things. As a matter of fact, I think I did. I just bought a bunch of 1-inch square steel tubing and copied the measurements from them and expanded metal, and we just welded them. I think we had 6 of them. We had three sets, so that you would, when you put them together, you had a 2-inch space, and they were all half chickens. That's all we ever cooked. And I think there were 50. You could put 50 halves in one rack. And we had an old guy that was coaching us. God, I can't remember his name either. But he would tell you, keep checking them, keep checking them. We turn those things every 2-3 minutes, And he said, if you look at them, turn them. So we would do that and just keep shoveling new coals under there. But we made some really good chicken. And the key to his key was not to put the sauce on until they were done. So once you determined that a rack was ready, you'd open it up, and then all the half chickens would go into the pot. We had a big, I think it was a 10-gallon container, and they went in there. Then they came out and drained, and then they were put in the coolers and ready to sell.
Publix would donate us, local grocery stores would donate us food and stuff for auxiliary. They'd make sandwiches, bring them out, water, soda, and take care of the volunteers. And that money we raised during those barbecues and stuff funded that type of activities.
We were looking for something, a fundraiser, and that was what came to mind. And I think it started with the 4th of July parade, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's where it got rolling. And then it was an annual thing. Those racks they just got used and used. There's 4 of them disappeared. I have 2. I have 2 of them at the shop. And when we had Dan's retirement party, we did the chickens on the rack. That we set up a cinder block pit and built the fire in it, just like we did in the old days. And that was how he got to celebrate his retirement.
And after we hired our first employees in 1984, we started getting busier and busier and busier. And I think it was early 90s we ceased to have those barbecues because we didn't have that many volunteers. They were dwindling. People's lives were getting busy. That's why we started hiring people in 84. They couldn't take off work to respond to the calls. And the same thing happened to the fundraising for the barbecues. We just didn't have people to help us, and too few people, and we just couldn't put them on anymore. But businesses donated lawnmowers, fishing poles, all kind of stuff. We'd raffle them off during the barbecues, and the public would just turn out in the hundreds and buy our barbecue, and everybody ranted and raved about how good it was. Don Colapietro, he built the racks that we used out of 1-inch square tubing and perforated steel. And you put these 2 big racks together. It was about 7-8 feet long. You clamp them together with a muffler pipe, and you put them over the charcoal, and you could flip a case or 2 of chickens at a time back and forth and smoke them over the charcoal and the oak wood, and they were just excellent. And the girls made their own barbecue sauce from scratch, and we coated them with that barbecue sauce, and everybody always wanted our recipe, but the girls, I don't think, ever let it out. But they would make gallons and gallons of that stuff. So,
Well, I thought that was the least I could do for my community. That was basically it.
sometime in the 90s, the department unionized, and they represented all the rank and file employees that was there. The chief, the assistant chief, the captains were not in the bargaining unit for years. So they looked out for, they didn't have to fight too hard, but they fought a lot to try to get improved salary or benefits. But the district always provided them with, I thought was fair benefits over the years. So, I mean, it was difficult working with a few people that the union would elect to be on their board to negotiate with us, but we always went back and forth and none of us became enemies. We're still friends to this day, so it was a working relationship, and everybody put their good foot forward on it to make it work.
We ran the business on Old 41 until it sold in 2005, and we moved to a house that we purchased on 4 acres of land on Shangri-La Road, which, by the way, was where we held Dan's retirement party. We've been there ever since. We do a lot of motorhoming. I still tinker with coaches part-time. I don't like to get too involved in it, but I pick and choose. Unfortunately, Dan's got a motorhome, so I see him quite often. But we enjoy camping. We like to travel. We did a couple of trips to Alaska, which is 15,000-mile round trip. We're both enjoying retirement.
Got married in 1972, raised my family, had 3 kids. My first daughter was born in 79, my second daughter was born in 82, and my son was born in 83. They've all grown up to be outstanding citizens. My oldest daughter, Jennifer, she works in a pro scan that does imaging. My middle daughter, Michelle, she's an acute care nurse practitioner working in Carolina, and my son is firefighter paramedic captain now, working for North Collier Fire Department. And my wife and I have been married since 1972. She raised our kids, did a great job. We also owned Bonita Boarding Kennel and Pent Camp for 10 years. And that provided a lot of revenue to raise the kids properly and send them off to schools where they became outstanding citizens. And we enjoy living here in Bonita Springs. We can't go camping like we used to. We raised all of our kids out east of town, riding in swamp buggies and airboating and go driving up and down the beaches, and all that's gone, but raised the kids during a wonderful time. And it's still a wonderful place to live. It's just really busy now. But we still reside here and got no plans on moving anytime soon.
That was it. And I stayed on as commissioner after I retired as a deputy chief. Stayed on until I guess they just decided that they didn't need either myself or Harvey Haynes anymore, and they elected 2 new guys, and then they voted to pay themselves the month after.
Finally, in 2007, I decided after all those years, the wife and I need to spend some time together, so I retired. And it was a wonderful trip through all those years.